to Peter and then the panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jyoti. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the very Indian tradition, sir, this is like the Ganesh Puja, any FICCI function cannot start unless we have welcomed you on our behalf. So it's like a Ganesh Puja. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this event, where we are going to talk about how the geopolitical and economic scenario is changing as a result of COVID-19. What does it mean for India? And how best can India recalibrate its international relations to capitalize on the changing global order, at the same time drive its own economic growth? We have a distinguished panel comprising of leading officials who have served India in important capacities. So alphabetically, I would like to welcome Shri S.C. Garg ji, Shri Vijay Gokhale ji, Shri Ajay Shankar ji, and Shri Navdeep Suri ji to our panel. We thank you for kindly accepting our invitation. As I had mentioned, our president, Sangita, who was supposed to chair the session, unfortunately is not present, so I'm officiating on her behalf. The entire world is engaged in exploring new ways to control the pandemic. But unfortunately, except for a few countries like South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, the rest, including economically developed countries like US, UK, to some extent Germany, France, Italy, have not been able to fully address the disease as they would have wanted. Economies worldwide have faced disruptions which impact their growth as well as economic well-being. The slowdown of production in China has affected economic activity in almost all countries, which source raw materials or products from China. Economic activities also came to a near halt in many countries due to their own shutdowns. But in a great difference from India, much of industry kept on working in most of the other countries. We've had a lot of people who've got international businesses, and they were saying that probably the only place that they have shut down has been in India. Anyway, that is because that takes care of our own peculiarities and our own demographics. So that is a call for the government to have taken, and I think we have done well. Demand for most products has collapsed, and that seems to be the biggest problem going forward, particularly as delivery chains have remained closed and people have also stayed indoors. International trade got affected due to sealing of borders or logistic issues. Almost all corona-affected countries have experienced similar demand and supply scenarios over the past 3 months. Businesses are incurring huge losses and people are facing livelihood challenges. In many cases, they are supported by the government. The global economy is projected to contract in 2020 and has already entered recession. Global economic growth will continue to remain under pressure in the near to medium term until a solution to the COVID can evolve. We may see significant lasting change in the geopolitical order as a consequence of the pandemic. Many countries have realized that they have a large dependence on China-driven supply chains, and they are keenly looking at alternates, more at a strategic level. India is urging global players to look at India as a future alternative supply base. There is, of course, apprehension that protectionism will gain momentum and larger domestic supply chains will become the order of the day in all countries, across countries. While geopolitical competition may become intense, given the linkages created over the years, a journey back to the pre-globalization era seems difficult, no matter how many people say that we are going back. It is almost certain we will see significant change in international relations, which is bound to impact India in more ways than one. It is critical for India to comprehend the essence of these changes and how global balances may change, plan how it should safeguard itself, and design suitable strategies to capitalize on emerging opportunities. It is our privilege that we have with us such an eminent group of panelists with decades of experience in interpreting emerging geopolitical and economic trends and implications for our economy. We look forward, sir, to your views and suggestions, your guidance, how the Indian industry can prepare to face these challenges. I thank you all for being with us, and we thank our partners, Herr Peter Rimmele from the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, which has a deep engagement with FICCI, for supporting us in this very important dialogue. Thank you very much. Over to you, Jyoti.
Yes. Thank you, sir, for laying down, the broad this thing of the program of what we intend to discuss in the next few minutes of the program. May I now request Mr. Peter Rimmele to kindly make his opening remarks. Peter, as we all know, is currently the resident representative of Konrad Adenauer Stiftung office in India. Is a great friend of FICCI and always been very supportive of all our initiatives. He's had an illustrious career across various government departments in Germany, and has he served as a representative in some of the countries as well. And he's a lawyer by training, and he served as a juris judge and lecturer. Very illustrious career. Over to you, Peter, for your introductory remarks. Thank you.
Mute me?
Yes.
I need to be unmuted? Yes.
You are there. You're there.
Okay, thank you. Dear Mr. Biller, Ambassador Gokhale, and all the other eminent panelists on the, let me call it, virtual dice we have today. Let me start with a statement. I find that Corona is dividing the world further, but not uniting it more. And then maybe we can look into details. We find ourselves in lockdown. We're now nearly 3 months into the reign of COVID-19, and so far it does not look as if the virus is going to loosen its strange hold to humanity anytime soon. With infections on the rise, casualties mounting, we are all primarily concerned with containing the threat by all means possible. But the effects of the pandemic that we feel today are only the first harbingers of things to come. Like a shockwave, the pandemic has moved around the globe and appended old certainties. Our world has changed and will change even further, and at a faster pace as weeks, not months, leave alone years, go by. Today, we will discuss the geopolitical and economic impact of the pandemic, at least as far as we know it, or as far as we expect things happening, but always open for surprises. The economic repercussions are already being felt around the globe, especially in the global south, but also elsewhere. The trade-off between lives and livelihoods, almost a Faustian compact, has become a cruel reality all over the globe, and countries are torn between saving lives on the one hand and kick-starting the economies on the other. The political long-term impact on the pandemic is not yet that clear, but I believe we can already discern some trends here. From an international perspective, allow me to briefly set out the state of Germany's economy as well as our geopolitical aims and beliefs. The coronavirus pandemic is triggering a deep recession in Germany. A survey of German companies by the DIPP, Chamber of Industry and Commerce, so partner institute maybe of FICCI, showed that 4 in 5 expect their revenues will shrink in 2020, and a quarter said business would fall by more than 50%. About 18% say they are threatened with insolvency. Several large companies, including Adidas, Condor Airline, TUI, travel company, have already taken out massive government-backed loans, and the country's flagship carrier, Lufthansa, is still in negotiations. Yesterday, they have agreed for a government bailout package, but that would be waiting for EU permission, what is difficult to achieve. Just to compare with the efforts of the Indian government to privatize India, that process was done years ago with Lufthansa. They were privatized, celebrated to be private, and now they have to go back to a form of government participation, just to show changing times. The research institutes say that the economy probably shrank by 1.9% from January to March, As Reuters previously reported, they say the German economy is likely to shrink by 4.2 this year and may grow by 5 point something next year. The institute say an unprecedented stimulus package of 750 billion euros approved last month to mitigate the impact of the pandemic would see Germany's debt to output ratio rise to 70% this year from around 60% before. And the finance minister voted to provide additional stimulus for after the pandemic. He said that the debt ratio could be as high as 75%. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, let's not make a mistake. Germany will suffer immensely, and so will the world from the stoppage of international production and the breakdown of international supply chains. And just Mr. Bela has focused before also on the Chinese part of what was interrupted, what is important for many countries. Germany is still the export nation and deeply embedded in these chains. Around the world, we have witnessed a political knee-jerk reaction towards more autonomy, also towards more protectionism, and reducing reliance on foreign goods, semi-finished goods, and raw materials. In fact, Germany's federal health minister has announced that one of the tenets of Germany's EU Council presidency will be to repatriate important pharmaceutical production back to Europe. As obvious, this is mainly addressed, let's say, to China, but I don't know how far the outsourced production, the pharmaceutical sector plays a large role in India, plays a role in that thinking as well. This, I think, is a sensible approach and maybe our version of Attam Nirbharta, and certainly a wake-up call for some in Germany who started to believe, so I'm sharing it with some children now, that the current international setup of global supply chains would remain unchanged for times to come. However, I must earnestly point out that the global economy is unthinkable without the fine network of supply chains and trade network that span the world. The interdependency guarantees not only our prosperity, I'm not talking of Germany, I'm talking of the world, but a degree of international peace as well. We cannot risk that. Maybe we should nationalize a recognizable size and a strategic goods production, especially to alleviate dependency on one country alone. But at the same time, we should try to make our supply chains more stable, not so less prone to any kind of threat like we have it experienced now with the fragile chains. Call it gated globalization if you want. It is impossible to speak about geopolitical challenges without mentioning China. For decades, the Western world had anticipated the so-called peaceful rise of the dragon, but we still have been caught unprepared when it did rise and turned aggressive. Though the USA has been wary for a long time now, their warnings were not heeded in Europe or Africa, where Chinese influence grew over the past decades. Germany is not interested in conflict on the world stage. Our economy is based on export. We thrive under the conditions of an open market. As such, Chinese control of strategic trade routes, bottlenecks, and resources are becoming increasingly threatening as the communist power starts flexing its muscle politically, particularly in the wake of the virus, while China and the US continue in their wall of warts, what in my opinion none of the sides will win. Going by the recent reports, India too is at the receiving end of the Chinese Sun Tzu antics. The Dragon Acts have brought Taiwan and Hong Kong back in focus, as also Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines. The list is getting longer and longer. In this newly polarizing world, it is especially important to broaden the field of potential partners. India and Germany share values and aims that should suffice to put us in a close or even closer working relationship than it is already the case. We both believe in democracy, rule of law, as well as a rules-based multilateral world order. Europe, as well as India, are interested in maintaining the multilateral order. We both wish to see the Indo-Pacific remain an international sea of and an influence in the regions bordering it to be balanced. Together, India and Europe would be able to provide a much-needed counterweight to the growing Chinese power in the Indo-Pacific. Maybe also together, India and Europe could work to compensate the vacuum left in the regional security architecture that the American withdrawal from Afghanistan will inevitably leave behind. Together, we could bring a new impetus to the international fight against terrorism that threatens our way of life. Let me, ladies and gentlemen, please sum up my remarks with this clarion call for renewed partnership, more intense partnership between India and Europe. We are facing unprecedented challenges, both politically and economically, but in challenge, there always lies an opportunity to stand closer together and unite over commonalities against common threats. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter. I think very important concluding line that you made is that there is always an opportunity in the adversity, and I think that's what we need to take the maximum advantage of. We have a very distinguished panel, as you can all see. So I think without ado, we will move on to the panel discussions now. We will start with Mr. Subhash Garg. Mr. Subhash Garg, as you all are aware, is a senior civil servant with considerable experience at the highest levels of the government, and he's well managed the fiscal finances at the provincial and the central government. He's been the India's ED in the World Bank Group, representing Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Sri Lanka. Recently, he's also been appointed as an advisor to the Chief Minister of State of Andhra Pradesh, which is a large state facing some resource crunch, and his valuable experience can come handy for them. He's of course authored many high-level reports when he was in the government, and academically, I think he has pretty much all the right degrees in his hand. He's trained as a lawyer. He's got professional qualifications like cost management, accountant, and company secretary. So the right person to manage the finances. Over to you, sir, for your quick remarks on this panel today. Thank you.
Panel today.
Yes. You know. So you have to unmute your. Yes, sir. Now you can go ahead.
Is it fine?
Yes, sir.
All right. So good afternoon to you all. It's pleasure to be on this panel. Let me, in the initial remarks stage, lay out a little bit of how the COVID-19 threat has been dealt with and its economic consequences. And then a little bit later on about what kind of geopolitical implications this might throw up for India. So as we all know, this virus was a massively disruptive. There is some background noises, so either some are not muted, some maybe audience in the are not muted themselves.
Everybody is muted.
Okay, maybe then this is a system point. So the COVID-19, the kind of virus it was, very sort of dangerous in a way, spreading asymptomatically. You don't know how it was spreading. So there was a lot of uncertainty, lack of knowledge how to deal with it. And in such circumstances, the best option which the people would come up or the governments would come up was to sort of virtually lock down everything, try to isolate each human beings, each family from everybody else, so that the spread of the virus does not get much traction and it can be stopped in its tracks, so to say. India opted for one of the most stringent lockdown. Practically, we shuttered almost entire industry services, except some essentials, as we call them. Now, in the month of May, we have the data also of the kind of impact it caused and the kind of stringent lockdown it was. So practically for the month of entire April, the Indian GDP The monthly GDP loss is about 70 to 75%. So if we produce in 1 month about 8 to 9% of GDP, we practically lost close to 5 to 6% of GDP for the entire year in 1 month alone. And let us keep in mind that we were slightly slowing down even before the COVID threat came into it. The data for 2019-20 would come very soon, but it is expected to deliver only about 4% growth for 19-20. That's one of the lowest growth for India in many decades, so to say. The situation continues to be a little better, but quite seriously impacted in the month of May also. It's estimated that about 50% of the GDP will get lost for the month of May as well. And going by the kind of expectations which are off, and the systemic disruptions and the frictions which are still to be sorted out, I suspect that we might lose about 1/3 of GDP in month of June as well. All this put together, a massively about 50%, 40 to 50% GDP loss for the entire quarter. And maybe the Indian economy would contract between 5 to 10% for the entire 2021. This is one of the most massive sort of contraction we have ever seen. The last time we contracted was in 1979, when we contracted by about 3%. That economy was very different economy. There was a lot of agriculture dependence, and depending upon the monsoons, we were facing one of the worst monsoons in that year, and that is what caused the Indian economy to decline. But now we are not. Agriculture is only about 14 to 15%, but still we would be closing the year not less than 5 to 10% of contraction. So this is one of the most severe. As we all understand, the economy, which is the value add, sum of value added, so to say, is shared by basically three groups of people. One is the guys who earn wages and salaries, so that is the workers. Second is the capital, so the industrialists and others who put in the capital into the enterprise using technology and other things, to machine technology, and also they get a share of it. And finally, the government get in the form of different taxes. So when the economy contracts by about, if it contracts by 10%, it will be about 20 lakh crores loss of income for the nation as a whole. And everyone is impacted. The government has already recognized that the tax revenues would go down by something close to 3 to 4 lakh crores. They are increasing the borrowings. Borrowings are scheduled to go up from 8 lakh crores to about 12 lakh crores. Workers' plight we have seen in the which is visible everywhere, most pathetically in the form of what has happened to migrants. So we have about 45 crore workers in the economy. So it's estimated that about 10 to 12 crore workers lost their jobs. About 40% of them are migrants. So what you saw about 1 crore plus migrants moving from one place to another in the economy is only a fraction of and amongst the capital or the businesses, the biggest has been caused, or disruption has been caused to the small and medium enterprises. We have something like 7.5 crore. The impact on the smaller side, smaller is very large. So one day the government said that the part of the package which came, the 3 lakh crore package, which addresses about 45 lakh MSMEs. So about 7 crore MSMEs are not the ones which are getting any support. This is the group which is the biggest affected. To summarize this, so it's a very large impact. Everyone is affected: workers, the businesses, and the government. All of them are affected. In such situation, it is only the government which has the largest means to address. The society confers this right on the government. The government can collect in the form of taxes, and if required, it can borrow as well as print money. That is how the government's authority to meet or to provide the last or being the lender or the provider of the last sort of assistance is recognized in the society. So the government came up with a package, but that package is very heavily loaded on the credit and liquidity. There is a relatively very small component of the fiscal support. It's now documented quite well. That's about 1% of that 10% of GDP package, about 2 lakh crores out of 20 lakh crores, is the fiscal side. Obviously, when so much of incomes have been hurt of the workers as well as of the businesses, this has been viewed as somewhat of a sort of not adequate enough to address the situation. Now, I think how do we deal with the lockdown conditions and how do we deal with the economy will have impact on the spread of virus, but it will have more impact on the way the three big constituents of the economy will sort of be impacted. So I would expect now the government to slowly or quickly unlock the lockdown, so to say, and unlock the economy. I think if we go for a decision where almost entire economy is unlocked by the end of June, and from June to July or so, the whole of the economy starts working normally, I think we would be sort of saving the day for us. We will have relatively lesser losses than what it is. But if we remain too scared and we remain too conservative in our approach and we keep the economy locked down, I think our losses would be much higher. Coming to the global dimensions of it, see the global economy is integrated quite a lot. Every time any big epidemic happens, there is a tendency to draw into your own shell. This is not unnatural, but it doesn't last very long. As soon as you are able to get over that scare and that feeling, I think the human tendency and the rationale of economy would work to bring back Spanish flu, as people now recognize, was much bigger, where about 5 crore people lost their lives globally. After the Spanish flu did not sort of kill global trade and the global production. The economies actually integrated and prospered much more thereafter. So I suspect, and I would like to believe, that the impact of the COVID crisis 19 would be temporary. It may be 6 months, it may be 1 year, it may be 2 years, but it will not last very long. There are three kind of relationships or three kind of products which get in a way traded globally, including the services. One is the resources, and no country is self-sufficient in every kind of resources. For example, take India's case, we will never be able to produce adequate amount of the oil which we need, and therefore we will always import oil. The same thing applies for many other commodities, whether it's agriculture, fruits, vegetables, natural resource and all. So that trade will have to continue. People may take some decisions that you can cut down on consumption, that might reduce the quantity of things imported and exported, but that's not likely to go away. The second thing, which is of the biggest importance now as compared to maybe 40 years or 35 years back, is the great technological integration which has come about. Much of the global economy is now services driven. So, and the technology is what enables and will enable much more the delivery of services. Today, to deliver the technological services in US or elsewhere, Indian techies travel all over. It's now possible, as the technology is developed, that most of those services can still be delivered remotely. So I see a lot of changes taking place about the mode of delivering, but the global integration which the technology has brought about is unlikely to go. And lastly, I think this global value chains where the industry comes in much more. The argument is basically the efficiency argument and cost reduction. I think the world would be a poorer place if we sacrifice these efficiency gains and get into our cells. So I think even this maybe temporarily for some time there would be a kind of loss, but this would come back. So my sense about the geopolitical, some tensions which remain between China, America, otherwise some shifting of the production might take place. But by and large, overall, I don't see the global trade decelerating for long, for temporary only. I'll stop at this stage and would be taking up other issues during the second phase of our discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your detailed analysis of the situation and how it is likely to pan out. As always, very interesting thoughts, sir. We now move to the next speaker, Ambassador Navdeep Suri. Thank you for being with us. Ladies and gentlemen, he's the Distinguished Fellow and Director of Center for New Economic Diplomacy at ORF. This is his current role. Of course, he served as IFS officer over 36-year career, have served in various positions in his posting at the UAE. He was conferred with an Order of Zayed II, the country's second highest civilian award, and his innovative use of social media and public diplomacy in 2010 also received extensive recognition and 2 prestigious awards. And very interestingly, sir, you've done the English translation of several of your grandfather's novels. So I think that was a very interesting insight of your biodata. So over to you, sir, for your views on the subject. And please, those who have not muted, kindly please mute yourself. There is a lot of disturbance in the background. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Jyoti. We did have a momentary period of silence, so I'm hoping we can get that back.
Checking, sir. I'm checking meanwhile.
नहीं तो जब जाना था पता नहीं है छोटे कितना पूरा करेंगे पता नहीं है अब देखिए जमा देना अच्छा वाला
dealing with a different set of geopolitical consequences.
We just stream is trying, sir. Yeah, you can start, sir.
All right. What I'll try and do is give you a very quick overview. Do something. Yes.
You're back on.
अभी का फोन आया था हमारी आई नहीं अभी तक हमने
Suri sir, you're back on.
All right.
You're back on.
Maybe what you could do is mute everybody first, and then I'll unmute myself or unmute me. Does that work?
Yes, maybe. I think we can try that once again, but everybody's muted. We've checked all the list of participants. Everybody's muted. But we'll just quickly do that. We'll quickly do that also.
Is Chandan mute?
Chandan, just mute everybody.
Everybody's on mute, ma'am. Just trying to figure it out.
Okay. Anyway, so what I was saying is that I'll try to give you a quick overview from.
अगर कहेंगे ना हम हमारा उठाती है तुम्हारे उसमें खा जाएंगे नहीं हमने कहा कि हाँ हमारा भी नहीं उठाती बैलेंस हो गई कि चलो अच्छा हमारा भी उठाती है.
I don't know how this is happening. I think it's a cross correction. I see everybody's muted. I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I can't compete with that in terms of level of
Issue is
interest.
at the WebEx side, sir.
Okay. Okay. Let me try this again. So what I'll try and do is just give you a quick overview of some of the geographies that I've worked in and I know a little bit about in terms of the geopolitical impact, and then come to just a few based on some of my conversations with sovereign wealth funds in UAE, etc. Are about the hit that they've taken in Europe and in US because they had huge investments in the hospitality and retail sectors, and will probably be looking at other opportunities around the world. Can we do something in that space? And I see my friend Subhash nodding because for 2 years I pestered him in easing up our regulatory frameworks to allow sovereign funds and easier access into India, because this is the kind of long-term capital that the Indian economy really needs. So finally, in this budget, there was a carve-out for certain sovereign funds to enable them to go beyond that absurd 10% cap that we had imposed on them to prevent them from investing too much in India. And guess what? There's been an advanced tax authority ruling which has set the clock back on that again. So, we again have that situation of the left hand not knowing what the right is doing. But I certainly see a huge opportunity for India as a country that can make a pitch to pension funds in Canada and Australia, and to sovereign funds in Gulf and in Norway, etc. Finally, we've looked at the returning migrants, and I was very pleased that a suggestion that we made from our side has been accepted, and the government is actually documenting the skill profile of those migrants who are coming back from the Gulf, so that can be made available to industry at a time that it's trying to cope with the departure of domestic migrants. I'll stop there and hand over the floor back to Jyoti.
Thank you, sir. Some very interesting examples of how the adversity has really been well utilized, and there are some shining sectors even in the current phase, and these opportunities shall remain forever alongside our normal activities. So maybe there are a lot of positivities which may come out while we are dealing with the current challenge. Of course, we have with us another very distinguished speaker, career diplomat, has served in various countries across the globe. Has been the Secretary ER for about a year or so, and indeed the Foreign Secretary January 18 to January 2020. So with your vision of having served around the globe, etc., it'll be great to get your views. So over to you, sir.
Mike.
Yes, sir. You're on.
Thank you, Siddharthji. Thank you, Peter. I just want to build a few on the arguments that both Subhash and Navdeep have made, because I think they've been cogently argued out. I want to start by saying that certain trends were visible globally even before COVID-19. You had the United States becoming less international and more domestic focused or America-centric. You clearly saw the rise of China and the beginnings of greater competition, certainly, between the United States and China. There was also the beginnings of a sense, both in the United States and in Europe, that there was a need to reduce dependency on China in terms of global supply chains. And we also had the industrial trend of Industry 4.0 or the Internet of Things, which meant that there was a lesser dependency on labor and a greater dependency on automation. I would hazard the guess that COVID-19 and the post-COVID-19 world would continue these processes. I don't think any of these processes will be interrupted by COVID-19. But the question to my mind is how quickly these processes move ahead. My own sense is that if China is able to stabilize its economy and to maintain growth by stimulating domestic consumption and also by raising its quality of industry to the level of services and high technology, then I would expect China to certainly remain a major engine of global economic growth, perhaps the main engine of global economic growth. I would presume that much of industry which is currently invested in China would still remain there because global supply chains would still be dependent on China. So one interesting thing we should all be watching for is whether the current government can maintain political stability and restore the economy. If there is economic distress, of course, there may be political problems, but at the moment, there do not appear to be signs of that. The second question to my mind is who gets elected in Washington in November? If it is Trump, we could expect increased volatility and policy uncertainty. If it is Biden, it is more likely to be predictable and the responses to China will be measured. But either way, my sense is that there is a strategic shift in US policy, and that is likely to bring greater competition between China and the United States. I am not implying that there's going to be conflict, but certainly more competition than cooperation. In this context, as Navdeep said, we as India have to position ourselves by recognizing that with both the major countries, China and the United States, we will have certain problems. With the United States, of course, because we are a major exporter, because we have a trade surplus. The re-election of Trump, or perhaps even the election of Biden, is likely to lead to certain economic and trade issues. China, of course, it's a more assertive country. It's more determined to play a role in our region and in our larger Indo-Pacific. So we are going to come up against that. Nevertheless, I believe there is an opportunity to leverage both countries for our economic benefit. I want to conclude with one observation which I had formed when I was ambassador to Germany. And that is that while our FDI policy is excellent, and the next speaker, in fact, has started that whole process of liberalizing FDI, and Mr. Ajay Shankar is going to speak on that, I'm sure. The last mile connectivity which helps foreign companies to do business in India is still very much lacking in India. In other words, while policy is good, coming as I am from the state of Maharashtra, I find that German companies, for instance, find it much more difficult in India to register a business, to get land, water, permissions, electricity connections, labor, to understand taxation, and to sort out legal issues. My sense is this is a golden opportunity, not only for the state I come from, but for India. But until we address this particular bureaucratic problem, no amount of policy application is going to make a difference. I want to conclude by completely endorsing Subhash's view on the global aspects. The 3 points he mentioned about global dependency on resources and energy continuing, service and technology delivery continuing, maybe remotely, and global supply chains resuming because efficiency gains are there. I completely endorse this view. It's extremely well put. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for giving your very valuable view. We move to Mr. Shankar. You just referred to him a while back. He, of course, is the member of the Premier IAS Services since 73, retired as Secretary DIPP. He served for a few years as Member Secretary of National Manufacturing Competitive Council, and a lot of reforms, even as Secretary DIPP, and even later he's been part of several reforms and several reports. It'll be great to have your views, sir, on this topic. So over to you, Mr. Ajay Shankar. You'll have to unmute. Yes.
Yeah. Am I visible, audible? Not yet?
You're not visible yet, but I think it will come in a while. We can see you. Yes, you're there.
I'm there? Or have I gone out?
You've gone off again, but we can hear
Okay,
you
let
very
me-
loud and clear.
Okay, let me come back and I hope I'm visible soon enough. Yeah, I think I am.
Yes.
So, let me begin by saying that as of now, nobody has any clear assessment of when the Indian economy or the global economy will recover from the present COVID crisis. One view in the US is an influential view by Ken Rogoff, who was the chief economist of the IMF, that it may take them as much as 5 years to get back to the pre-COVID per capita incomes. So that is one dimension globally. The other is that, and which is a positive for us, that in the foreseeable future, oil prices will remain low. And typically in India, we've always been very vulnerable to oil price movements one way or the other. The third global dimension, which has been referred to, and which I think will stay and will gather momentum irrespective of what happens in the next 2-3 months, is the search for reducing dependence on China as the center of global supply chains. So if I were a commercial firm and not looking at politics, even risk mitigation would make me think of seeing how I can hedge my bets. So these are three, I think, global factors which should influence our thinking going forward. And I believe that since we really don't know when the Indian economy will get back to the pre-COVID levels, and those levels themselves were low. And as Subhash Garg pointed out, we had a bit of a downturn. So we need to think how we need to re-strategize so that once normalcy returns, we can start growing at our full potential. Because if you look at this century, the first decade was great. The second decade could be called a lost decade, like the Latin American countries have had many lost decades in the last century. So how do we get out of that syndrome? Now, one positive going for us, and which I think is important, is that our per capita income is so low, and therefore the headroom for growth is still very high. So if we strategize in terms of our sheer size and the potential for growth, economic growth as well as for investment in infrastructure, etc., I think post return of normalcy in economic activity within India has the potential where if we get our policy instruments right and get our act together, then we should at least plan for very, very rapid growth, which in my view is achievable. Now, if we move in that direction, then we also need to think of policy instruments which are a little different from what we have used since the 91 reforms. So globally, there is a bit of a, what to call, when somebody used some retreat from globalization. So we need, I think, a slightly nuanced policy going forward. Now, what should be the policy objectives? The instruments should follow from that objective. So if we look at our largest trading partner, that is China today, in goods, and all that we import from China was being made in India, can be made in India, they are still not the major provider of frontier technology capital goods to India. Our trade with countries from where these goods can come, which is Europe or Japan, is still modest. So I think we need a kind of industrial policy which looks at getting labor-intensive manufacturing into India, getting greater share of the domestic market to production in India. If we do that systematically, then the other side will automatically follow, which is getting in a bit of the global supply chains into India. The Indian market is so large that if we get a large share of the Indian market, say in a labor-intensive area like toys, then automatically we will be in a position to be part of global supply chains. That's what any Walmart will tell you or Hanley will tell you. But we've not had as yet a sector-specific policy of getting domestic investment as well as foreign investment in labor-intensive manufacturing. We need to do that because we also need to create jobs in India. And if we pursue that route, and if we want global supply chains to come into India, then we have to create islands of infrastructural excellence with expressway connectivity to the ports and the airports. Because the whole of India will take a while to get infrastructure, which is world class. But we succeeded in IT because we created IT parks where the infrastructure was as good as anywhere else in the world, and therefore we could compete. In manufacturing, we haven't done it, so it's time we decided to do it and put in public money. Once we do that, then it is far easier to go to somebody who has his supply chain in China and try and talk to him and say, as risk mitigation, forget geopolitics, come to India. But that would happen once we have a place with infrastructure which appears attractive enough. If I have to drive on potholed roads for 3 hours from the airport, I won't be tempted to come to India except if I have to come for the Indian market. Then the one other which was mentioned by Mr. Gokhale and I is that we have to go back to the drawing board and re-engineer our regulatory regimes. But the fact of the matter is that very few businessmen in private will say, India is truly business friendly to business. It is not. So we have to go back to the drawing board. We have to get greater predictability in the way the tax system works, bring greater certainty in the way we give environment and other clearances. We get into the crossing the T's and dotting the I's on the micro ingredients of regulation. We have to move to third-party certification and so on and so forth. Yes. This is painstaking, detailed work. It's not glamorous. It will not get us headlines in the newspapers. But there is no other alternative. Because otherwise, this approach we've had of getting states to compete with each other and tick mark themselves on being best in terms of ease of doing business is not getting us very far. So we have to move away from that and really re-engineer the regulatory regime. And as we re-engineer the regulatory regime, the final thing that we have to pay attention to, and that is not on the agenda at all, is how do we reduce the cost of doing business in India? Now, for a variety of political economy reasons, going from the days where we were a closed economy, we have unthinkingly been increasing the costs of doing business. To give just one example, diesel and petrol are the most highly taxed commodity in this country. We still are not willing to put them on GST. But they're such a major cost component for all business that ideally they should be in the GST at the middle level. Similarly, we built these national highways with toll roads. And the toll burden is on business finally. I mean, ideally that toll burden should be on all consumers through taxes and not on business. I'm just giving two examples to drive home the fact that we need a serious discussion in this country on how to reduce the cost of doing business. So these high costs of doing business in terms of tax, logistics, and so forth, completely undo the notional advantage we have of a lower wage cost. So that wage cost itself is partly undone by low productivity and the fact that we don't have workers housing close to factories, so the worker comes tired and so on and so forth. And then we don't spend public money in training him and bringing him to the levels of productivity which the worker in China has. I think we have to rethink many things. We have enough time between now and return of full economic activity post-COVID. So let's go back to the drawing board, get our act together, and be ready to take off full speed. And one last point, we should also start thinking of re-engineering the Indian economy in a direction where growth is investment-led and growth is led by a transition to what I'd call a green economy, and an economy where we become one of the global leaders in terms of movement towards a net carbon neutral economy. With that, I would say, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for giving some of the, also the policy prescriptions on what needs to be done now and post-COVID to strengthen our economy, make it more competitive. I think we've been reading all of your articles and you well highlighted all these points even there. So we are, thank you for the discussions. I think they've been very enriching. There are a few questions which we have already received from our from our perspective. The participants who are here, they had already sent it in advance. But I can see one question here from Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, who's the question is China under pressure to push back, or is China stronger post-COVID and out to settle scores with its adversaries? So what is the panel's view on this? So if you could kindly throw some light on it. And there are a few more questions. I can follow those later.
I think Mr. Birla wants
Could
to say
answer?
something.
Yeah.
Can take this on.
Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, I think at this stage, China's principal focus is domestic. They've had a very traumatic time controlling COVID. And if you see the statements and the appearances of the leadership over the past 1.5 months, it is essentially to reassure the Chinese people that the situation will return rapidly to normalcy and that jobs and employment and incomes will be restored to the pre-COVID levels. I think that is the singular focus of the Chinese government. It is not my sense that certain activities which are being undertaken by China outside in the foreign policy realm have any particular direct bearing to the situation domestically. These are normally assertive activities that China has also been doing in the pre-COVID era. But at this stage, China's principal effort is to stabilize the economy. It is to ensure that they move towards a domestic consumption, domestic production, domestic consumption driven economy, that they retain as much of the global supply chain as they can, and that they scale up their technology and their R&D to reach levels by 2025, which will make China a serious economic competitor to the United States in terms of technology. And I believe that is their focus.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I think another question pertains to the probable job losses in the Gulf region and any possible impact on the remittances into India. So I think Ambassador Suri, if you have any comments to make on this.
Look, the job losses are real. I think as of last week, our embassy in Abu Dhabi and consulate in Dubai alone registered over 350,000 Indians who wanted to come back on this Vande Bharat flights. When you look at other parts of the Gulf, the numbers add up to that. Over and above that, I think, what you're seeing is, one is the immediate impact of the oil prices. Just keep in mind, the Saudis, for example, do their budgeting on a basis of $90 per barrel, and the Emiratis do it at about 65. So when oil is at 30, their projections go for a toss. The second thing which we are seeing now is that with the economic contraction in the Gulf, there's going to be a much larger pressure on localization of jobs. The Saudis had done this 2 years back with their Nitakat policy, and what we saw was the exodus of tens of thousands of Indians from Saudi Arabia. The Omanis are doing it with a renewed vigor now. The other countries have announced similar plans, and we will have to be prepared that certain jobs that were traditionally performed by expatriates are going to be taken over by locals. In Saudi Arabia today, you have Saudis in retail positions and as receptionists in hotels, and Omanis actually driving some taxis, something that was unthinkable even 5 years back. So let's be prepared that our population of 9 million or so in the Gulf is going to shrink, and it is going to have an impact on our remittances from the Gulf. At the same time, what we have been talking about, and something that we started in UAE and it's now extended to Saudi Arabia, is how do we move up the value chain in terms of skills? How do we go beyond the entry-level positions of our blue-collar workers and align our skill development programs with some of the vocational requirements that these countries in the Gulf are putting. So we've done a lot of work with NSDC on this, and the first batch of Indians with certificates in the construction and automotive trades has actually gone to UAE and has been chosen for Saudi Arabia. There's been a hiatus because of coronavirus, but I think longer term for us, if we want to preserve our position as the preferred source of expatriates in the Gulf, we will have to move up the value chain a bit.
Jyoti, your mic is off. Yeah.
No, hello. Hello.
Yes.
Hear you.
Can be heard.
Yes.
Yeah. The question is, can we come out or recover economic loss due to COVID-19 crisis in this year or not? I think Mr. Garg, you may want to take this.
The economic loss recovery, I guess, would mean that if we can generate a positive GDP again, that would be recovery of loss. So about 20 to 30 lakh crores of loss which has been caused or is likely to be caused in the first quarter. I don't think in this year you can at all have any expectation of recovering it. And therefore, the current year would certainly be a contraction year. The best chance you have is to do it next year, 21-22. There again, I think it will depend upon the kind of policies and the sort of stimulus or the fiscal package we bring about. There are three main buckets, if I can put it that way, of the economy, so to say. One is the normal economy, which roughly is about 75 to 80%, which is susceptible, which is something which we can put back onto the normal course if we have right kind of package to bring the businesses which have shuttered into production mode again. Then there is one part of the economy, let's say, which is about 10 to 12%, which is going to suffer permanent sort of damage. This is the industry or the services in transportation, entertainment, sports, and many of these things. Those are unlikely to come back to travel, for example, unlikely to come back to any degree of normalcy even in a fairly longer period. They will have to perhaps themselves revisit. Can you deliver a movie now onto the televisions directly rather than expect that movie to be sort of screened in cinema halls? And so many other decisions will have to be made about travel, entertainment. This is unlikely to come back to a normalcy even next year. Then there is another segment of the economy which is basically digital driven economy, where there is in fact opportunity to make up and to grow faster. I think that's another 10 to 15%. If we can do better on that front, capture even the global export and services, then perhaps we can make up the losses on the second bucket. So if we pursue policies appropriately and have the right kind of package, maybe in 2020, 21, 22, we can come back to the normalcy. Growth will take a little longer. That's my assessment.
Yes.
On possibility for India to get aligned with Japan and Germany as a way to hedge the US-China trade war. Mr. Gokhale, you may want to reflect on this one. And I think a related question here also is, since you have so much experience of Germany, is that which areas can India and Germany really focus on an immediate basis? And how can the human resource support the German manufacturing post-COVID? So would you want to take both of these? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Jyoti. Jyoti, I think Germany is already well invested in India. In many cities of India, there are German companies, and in general, German companies have a good impression of India. But as I mentioned in my earlier intervention, we need to step up our capacity at handholding and our capacity at delivering the last mile services so as to entice German companies to look at India as a market. I would also like to add here that if a foreign investor comes to India, that foreign investor is not merely looking at the Indian market, but at the capacity to also export to the larger region around India, the Indo-Pacific region. And therefore, because many German companies are part of a supply chain, it is important for India to get into those supply chains. I have always maintained, therefore, that our decision not to join the regional comprehensive economic partnership discussions or the final agreement was a mistake. I certainly hope that now, as part of the review, we can reconsider this matter. Now, the last point I want to make is that is to take up from what Ambassador Navdeep Suri said about large numbers of people returning from the Gulf. This is precisely the time when many of these workers who are skilled or semi-skilled and who have exposure to new technologies and who are entering through airports where they are being monitored in any case by every state because of the COVID problem, we need to immediately create a database of their skills and talents so that Indian industry has a single point, a single window where they can access that talent. I am convinced that somebody from Kerala or from Telangana or from Maharashtra who is returning from the Gulf and faces the prospect of having no jobs is quite capable and willing to go to Mumbai or to Hyderabad or to Chennai to work if that work is guaranteed to him. And therefore, I think we would be losing an opportunity in building this database. I have one last idea which I think I would like to leave everybody with, and that this is also the time we have one nation, one ration card. Why can we not have one nation, one labor card? Because this is the beginning then of creating a national skilling database and a national skilling training program. Of course, Dilip Chenoy probably knows more about this than anybody else. But the strength of Germany lies not only in its entrepreneurship, but in its remarkable skills programs, because they've built a national labor service in a sense. Now, we have this opportunity to do so. It's a time for drastic reform. It's a drastic idea. But if we can have one nation, one Aadhaar card, one nation, one ration card, we can certainly have one nation, one labor card. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Interesting thoughts. Mr. Billa, you wanted to say something? I think I just saw your message. I'm sorry I missed that earlier.
No problem. I actually don't have a question, but I'm just going to connect two things that I think Gokhale Saab mentioned and what Ajay Shankarji mentioned. Sir, to Ajay Shankarji's point, I think starting from 2014, FICCI had always made 2 points. One was that the cost of doing business overrides just an ease of doing business or everything. The total cost has to be seen. And in India, rightly or wrongly, the time factor, the waiting time in order to get a decision or to resolve something adds humongously to the cost, apart from everything else. So the cost of doing business is the key element. Number two, I think, as Gokhale Saab rightly pointed out, that India should have gotten into this global supply chains much earlier, because you had a chance of getting a larger part of the world trade than if you were trying to export yourself. So we lost that bus in, let's say, starting from 2014, where we should have made very, very serious efforts to become part of the global chain. Now we are saying that, listen, China se yahan aega. But aapne sir jo theek kaha, nobody is going to pick up capacity from China and move it out. Whatever capacity will come in India has to be incremental. And with a global market which is in recession or etc., the demand going down, who's going to put up a supply chain readily if the global market is going to go down? Nobody is going to move a supply chain out of China. India will be an alternative. And according to me, competitiveness is going to be a key if we want to attract investment and get into a part of a global chain. So I think I just want to make this comment. So we've been saying this non-stop since 2014 in different languages. But wo kya hai ki sometimes,
And Mr. Birla, if I may. Hello, Mr. Am I audible? Mr. Birla, I want to drive home one more fact that for last many years, because of rising wages, some jobs have moved out of India. But none of them have come to India because we haven't got our act together in terms of costs and infrastructure and regulation.
So we have been talking from then that, for example, in textile industry, the ex-factory cost of manufacture in India is actually less than the cost of manufacture in China. If you look at the total, I mean, forget the capacity and other things, by and large, you can match the costs of China from an ex-factory point of view. But आप जितने रुपए में मद्रास से लेकर के पोर्ट तक पहुंचाते हैं, in that much money, the Chinese delivers it in India. I mean, that is where we get knocked out. The cost of logistics, that is where we are getting knocked out. Anyway, so key point, nobody is going to move capacity and nobody is going to invest in a declining global market if there is no competitiveness. This is the, just wanted to piece these two together. Thank you, sir.
So there is a related question here, which is India aspiration to get companies from China a realistic one, and what steps should be taken by India? So I think pretty much answered between the two of you, but Mr. Shankar and Mr. Garg, if you would want to add something, and of course Ambassador Suri and Mr. Gokhale as well. I think this is pretty much the last question here.
See, I would only say that besides the ease of doing business, to get into the real competitiveness, you need what Mr. Shankar was saying, the cost of doing business should be low. We actually also need the right opportunity to do business, right ability to do business. When there is nothing to do business, ease of doing business doesn't really matter. We have packed so much of cost, competitiveness or uncompetitiveness into our system. He gave a couple of examples, but look at power cost, look at taxes, look at land. So we have priced ourselves out. We have made ourselves out of the competition. There's been a study which has documented that this trade war which was going on between China and America for last 2 years or so, there is about 6% shift took place from the American import from China to other countries. Hardly anything came to India. This relocated to Vietnam and elsewhere. So we will have to get our domestic competitiveness in industry in order. And there are numerous facts. I think, Mr. Birla, it's understood. But we need to get the decisions done, policies accepted, which will unroll or which will sort of. So I agree with that. Yeah.
So Shankar, you would like to add something?
I would like to only add that I think we need a wider debate in the country. And it's a political economy debate, whether we want production and jobs, and maybe at a little higher cost to the consumer or the middle class. We are very comfortable the way we are because then the elite is very happy because imported goods are cheaper and the costs go to business rather than to the elite as consumers. Because if you give electricity to industry at the right rate, then the domestic consumer has to pay some more. If you want to bring GST of petrol and diesel to the middle level of GST, then you have to raise GST for many other things. So that kind of granular discussion doesn't take place in this country.
Gokhale?
It's time we began that discussion, and I would certainly request BP to try and drive it as much as possible. Similarly, on regulation, we don't get that detailed discussion that we need. And Mr. Gokhale has seen it in Germany and elsewhere. There is so much of detailed work and discussion which goes on, and that doesn't happen in India. And I think it's time we got that going, both at the state government level as well as the central government.
Right, sir. Mr. Gokhale? Your view,
I
sir?
just wanted to add one point in addition to what Mr. Ajay Shankar said, and that is let us learn from the European and German experience in particular. Germany preserved its core industry, its consumers took a higher cost. Today, Germany is in the driver's seat. The rest of Europe outsourced to China. Today, their economies are hollow. I think if there's anything, any country we can learn from, it's Germany.
Please, Ambassador Suri, any last comments from you?
Just on the earlier point that Vijay had also made and I had made about the people who are coming back, Vijay, just to say that actually, a landing card has been prepared which captures the skill profiles of the workers who are coming back. This is a suggestion from my side to civil aviation and so on. And those cards are being given to NSDC to put into a central portal. And they reflect what the occupation has been: welder, plumber, electrician, etc., and how many years have been spent. And it also captures the contact details. So hopefully NSDC can have that portal up and running so that industry can benefit from the workers who are coming back. And it also mitigates their pain.
Very useful. Yes, sir, please.
One thought on that, the National Skill Mission has, according to me, had a huge challenge in finding skilled workers who could actually train people. So my first response would be that here is this exceedingly talented manpower. It'll be a while before they get jobs. Let's use them to train workers and create world-class workers.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, sirs, for a wonderful discussion this evening. I mean, my apologies for some disturbances in the technology platform. I think we're still kind of emerging and learning, so hopefully we'll try and do better. I think I've been getting suggestions to do it on Zoom, but Zoom has its security issues, so many companies don't allow Zoom. So we are kind of also learning as we go along, and hopefully next few days we'll have a better hang on the technology. But extremely good suggestions. I think very good. All of these points are being discussed, but I guess we need to kind of raise a pitch and make some of these things really happen in discussion with the government, of course. So with these words, thank you so much for joining in, sparing your valuable afternoon to be with us. And of course, to our partners, CAS, for always being there to support us. So thank you again, everybody, for joining in and a wonderful discussion that we had this evening. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Bye.